So we're reaching climax, people. Now getting into the grading sheet. Okay, so this is what we've been building up to. So a couple ways that you can approach grading, and I'll show you a couple ways. This is the way that I actually keep track of grades, and just let me explain what's going on here. So of course, the names of the students, and here you can see I have various assignments, assignment 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then I have various projects, the Word project, Excel project, and PowerPoint project, and then I also have a final exam, and attendance and participation, and all that together will give me a total, which is basically their final grade. Okay? And based on their final grade, I can give them a letter grade. Right now they're all F because I haven't calculated their final grade yet. I also calculate the average of everything, so the average for assignment 1, assignment 2, the average of the projects, and the average of the final grades, etc. And down here I have the weight of each of the assessment items. So assignments worth 5%, projects worth 10%, final 30%, attendance participation 15%. Now, I find it very easy to give students a grade that is simply out of the weight. Okay, so if the weight is 5, then I just give them a grade out of 5. If the weight is 10, I give them a grade out of 10. And if the weight is 30, like the final exam, I give them a grade out of 30. The reason why this makes this simple is at the end, the final grade is just a sum of all these assessment items. So if I take this and I do an auto sum of all those assessment items, I basically get a grade out of 100. Okay, and I can just simply auto complete that, and you can see all the grades. Now, just kind of ignore the letter grades. I'll explain that in another video of how to do that. Okay, but right now, just take a look at how I can just sum all of their assessment items to get their total. Okay, doing an average, quite simple. Just take the average function and do an average of those. So that would be the average of assignment 1, 4.4, and I can just kind of drag it across like that. Okay, so it auto-completes. There's the average for assignment 2, etc., etc., and the average for the final grade. Okay, and sometimes I like to do a check just to make sure that my weight does add up to 100. Okay, so let's do a sum of all those, and in fact, it does add up to 100. Okay, so I'll repeat. I find it very simple to just give a grade out of the weight. Okay, but let me just show you another way. If you do in fact like giving a grade out of a percentage. Okay, so here I have the weight of each of my assessment items. I kept it quite simple just to speed things up a little bit. So we have a midterm that's out of 40, final out of 100, and 10% for attendance and participation. And that in fact does add up to 100%. So we got Bob here. Let's say the midterm was out of 25, for example, and that person got 23 out of 25. Okay, so you could actually calculate their score out of that using the manual calculations that we learned about, equal to 23 divided by 25, and that will give me a decimal. Okay, and let's say May got 21 out of 25. Okay. Notice the type of score that you get. You get a decimal place, and this can be changed into a percentage. Okay, so be careful when working with percentages. Sorry. When working with percentages, a 92 is very different than 92%. Okay, so if you're working with numbers, work completely with numbers. If you're working with percentages, work completely with percentages, because 92% actually equals decimal 92. Okay, so not 92. Okay, so be careful of that. And final, same thing. Let's say your final is out of 50 points or something like that. 43 divided by 50. And equals 33 divided by 50. Okay. And again, let's change that to percentage. And I'm not sure how you calculate your participation, or if you even use this, but I'll just put some random numbers, like 90%. Oh, and be careful, this is going to end up being wrong. If I first put the numbers and then change that into a percentage, you can see that it gives that problem. Okay, so let's do it again, 90 and 80. Okay, so how do you calculate a weighted average? Okay, so some of you may have done this manually. Basically what you do is you take the grade out of the percentage and you multiply it by the weight, okay? And you get a weighted score. And basically you have to add all of the weighted scores. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a long calculation. So this is going to be equal to Bob's midterm multiplied by weight. Okay? Then I have to add this final multiplied by the weight. Okay? And then I have to add the attendance multiplied by the weight. Okay? And you can see how this is going to get a little bit long if I have more than 3 assessment items. So if I have assignment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, various projects, midterm, final, it does become a bit of a long formula. It's not so difficult, but it does create room for error with clicking and whatnot. Okay, and these you don't actually need parentheses because it does do multiplication before addition, so it does the weighted score plus weighted score plus weighted score. Okay, so if I just click enter, there is the weighted score. That doesn't seem right. Let's see what I did here. Okay. So as I mentioned before, when you do autocomplete, Excel will bump down the cell reference. So here you can see it bumped down the cell reference from Bob's scores to May's scores. Okay. But what it did when I autocompleted is it bumped down the weights and tried to go down to the next row. Okay. So what's wrong is this B6, C6, and D6. Okay, what it should be is B5, C5, and D5 should never change. Okay? If you want something to never change in a formula, it's what we call locking a cell. Okay, so what I have to do is I have to take this B5 and I have to lock it, and that's the F4 key. Okay? I press F4, notice that it puts $B, $5. That means cell B5 has been locked and it will never change. It will never kind of bump down as I autocomplete. So it will always use B5. Okay. I also want C5 to never change. C5, so I press F4 and you can see it's locked and C5 will never change. D5, let's lock that. Okay, so those have been locked. Now if I hit enter, I can autocomplete, and there we have it. Now it's given me a whole bunch of decimal places. I don't need so many, so I can just decrease the amount of decimal places. Okay. So for more information about locking cells, refer to the locking cells video, which will be created in a separate video, which needs a little bit explaining if that is confusing for you. Okay. So anyways, that's how to use a weighted average if you do use percentages in your grading. Okay. I find it a little bit more complex, so that's why I simply do it this way. Okay, just giving a grade out of the weight. Okay. You might argue that and say that, okay, well, that's fine, but for example, my final exam is not out of 30 marks. Okay, it has a lot more questions, and I need an exam out of 50 or 60 or something like that. And what I do is, if that's the case, I make the final exam a multiple of that score. So if I want my final to be a weight of 30, I make my final out of a multiple like 60 or 90. That makes conversion quite easily. That way I can just divide by 2 or divide by 3. So in fact, you can see my final exam is out of 60 marks. And that's why I have final raw here. And what I do is I take the final raw, and you can see the calculation here is I just take the raw score and divide it by 2, and I get out of 30. Okay, so that kind of keeps things, again, simple for me. So making a multiple of that score. Same thing if your projects have a weight of 10, but you don't want to grade out of 10, and you want to grade out of 30 or something like that, just make it a multiple out of 10, 30, 40, and then you can just divide by 3 or divide by 4. Okay? So there is a grading sheet. And I will include this file in Moodle so that you can download it and maybe modify it as necessary.